good now?
Yeah.
The sound of fabric tearing cut through the Friday night noise of the Copper Lodge like a knife through silence. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the VIP section where a man in a $3,000 suit had just grabbed the waitress by her apron straps and yanked hard enough to rip them clean off her body. The apron fell to the floor, leaving 28-year-old Jade Morrison standing there in shock, her white shirt underneath now exposed, her tips and order pad scattered across the hardwood like evidence of a crime nobody wanted to witness. Maybe if you actually listened when I ordered, tech billionaire Preston Caldwell sneered, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, I wouldn't have to get your attention like the child you are. He tossed the torn apron at her feet like garbage. What Preston didn't know was that 12 Iron Riders Motorcycle Club members were having their weekly meeting in a back room, and every single one of them had just heard fabric rip and a woman gasp in humiliation. Here's what you need to know before this gets wild. If you believe that putting your hands on someone without permission is assault regardless of how much money you have in the bank, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. The Copper Lodge sat on the edge of Reno, Nevada, the kind of establishment that straddled two worlds. The front dining room served upscale American cuisine to tourists and business travelers willing to pay $30 for a burger that came with truffle fries and microgreens. But the back room, separated by heavy oak doors and a sign that read, "Private events belong to the locals." Tonight, like every Friday night for the past 8 years, it belonged to the Iron Riders. Jade had been working at the Copper Lodge for 3 years. Ever since graduating from nursing school with $120,000 in student loan debt and discovering that entry-level nursing positions paid barely enough to cover rent, much less loan payments. She'd taken the waitressing job as a temporary measure, planning to save up enough for a down payment on a decent apartment before committing to hospital work with its brutal 12-hour shifts. 3 years later, temporary had become permanent because the tips at the Copper Lodge were too good to walk away from, and her loans were finally starting to shrink. She was good at her job, remembered orders without writing them down, anticipated customer needs before they asked, and had mastered the art of deflecting inappropriate comments with a smile that said, "Nice try," without costing her a tip. She'd dealt with handsy customers before, gently redirecting wandering hands and maintaining professional distance while still being friendly enough to earn 20% gratuities. But Preston Caldwell wasn't like the usual difficult customers. He was something worse. Preston had made his first billion at 32 by creating an app that aggregated restaurant reservations and reviews, then sold it to a larger tech company for an obscene amount of money. Now, at 46, he'd quintupled that fortune through strategic investments, real estate ventures, and a venture capital firm that specialized in crushing smaller competitors. Forbes estimated his net worth at $4.7 billion, and he treated that number like a shield that protected him from consequences. He'd arrived at the Copper Lodge at 7 p.m. with 4 colleagues from a tech conference happening downtown, immediately demanding the best table despite having no reservation. The hostess, terrified of the 1-star Yelp review he'd threatened to leave, had scrambled to accommodate him, displacing 2 couples who'd reserved weeks in advance. Preston had ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, then sent it back claiming it was corked, even though the sommelier had verified it was perfect. He complained about the temperature of the room, the noise level, the lighting, and the fact that his water glass had a microscopic spot on the rim. Jade had drawn the short straw, assigned to his table by a manager who apologized in advance. "Just smile and nod," the manager had said. "Men like that want to feel important. Give him that, and he'll tip well." But Preston didn't want to feel important. He wanted to feel powerful, and there's a difference. Power comes from making other people feel small. For the first hour, Jade had handled it perfectly. When he'd snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog, she'd responded with polite efficiency. When he'd sent back his steak 3 times, first too rare, then too well done, then just not right, she'd smiled and apologized as if it was somehow her fault the kitchen couldn't read his mind. When he'd accidentally brushed his hand against her hip when she reached across the table to refill water glasses, she'd stepped back smoothly and continued working. But then he'd grab her apron straps and rip them off her body, and that crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jade stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation as Preston's colleagues laughed nervously. Other diners pretended not to see, suddenly very interested in their meals. The manager was in the kitchen, unaware, and Jade felt something inside her crack. The professional mask she'd worn for 3 years shattering as tears pricked her eyes. "Pick it up," Preston commanded, pointing at the torn apron on the floor. "And bring me a waitress who actually knows how to do her job." That's when the heavy oak doors to the back room opened and 12 Iron Riders walked out like a storm given human form. Gunnar led them. The 58-year-old president, whose gray beard and weathered face told stories of 3 decades riding with the club. Behind him came Flint, the sergeant-at-arms who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had zero tolerance for men who hurt women. Torch, the road captain, whose prosthetic right leg never slowed him down. Axel, the enforcer, who stood 6'5" and weighed 270, all of it muscle. Rook, Knox, Sterling, Gage, Venom, Zinc, Rebel, and Nitro, each one wearing their Iron Riders cuts with patches that told their own stories of loyalty and brotherhood. They'd heard everything through the doors. The raised voice, the sound of tearing fabric, the gasp of shock and humiliation. And they'd made a collective decision without needing to discuss it. This stopped now. Gunnar walked straight to Jade, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor, and bent down to pick up the torn apron with a gentleness that contradicted his intimidating appearance. He handed it to her with both hands, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "You okay, darling?" Jade took the apron with shaking hands, tears now streaming down her face despite her best efforts to hold them back. She shook her head. No, she wasn't okay. Not even a little bit. Gunnar's jaw tightened, and he turned to face Preston Caldwell with eyes that had seen combat, tragedy, and every kind of human cruelty imaginable. "You put your hands on her," he said, his voice carrying through the now silent restaurant. "You grab her and ripped her clothing. That's assault." Preston looked at the bikers with undisguised contempt, calculating odds, and deciding he still held all the cards. "This is a private dispute between a customer and service worker. It doesn't concern you. Now I suggest you gentlemen return to whatever Hell's Angels convention you're having back there before I call the police and have you removed for harassment." "Iron Riders," Flint corrected coldly. "And we're not going anywhere until you apologize to her and pay for the damage you caused." Preston laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoing off the exposed brick walls. "Apologize? To a waitress? I don't apologize to people who work for tips. And I certainly don't take orders from bikers who probably don't have a college degree between them." He pulled out his phone with a flourish. "I'm Preston Caldwell. Do you know who I am? I could buy this restaurant with the change in my couch cushions. I could have every one of you arrested with one phone call. So I suggest you walk away before you make a very expensive mistake." Axel stepped forward, his massive frame making Preston look small despite the expensive suit. "We know exactly who you are. Preston Caldwell, 46 years old, divorced 3 times, currently under investigation by the SEC for insider trading, and sued 4 times in the past 2 years by former employees for creating hostile work environments. You're also 6 months behind on child support for your 2 kids, and you've got a DUI that your lawyers managed to keep out of the press." Preston's face went pale. "How do you know all that?" Gage finished, holding up his phone. "Because we looked you up while we were sitting back there listening to you abuse this young woman. Amazing what you can find on the internet in about 90 seconds. Preston's colleagues were already standing up, gathering their things, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. "Preston, maybe we should just go," one muttered. "The conference dinner is starting soon anyway." "Sit down," Preston snapped at them. "I'm not being intimidated by a bunch of thugs on motorcycles." He looked at Gunnar with what he clearly thought was authority. "You want to know what happens next? I'm going to walk out of here without paying because the service was so abysmal. Then I'm going to post a review on every platform I have access to, and I have access to a lot of them, detailing how this establishment allows its staff to be harassed by criminal biker gangs. By Monday morning, this place will be out of business." Or, Rook said quietly, pulling out his phone and holding it up so Preston could see the screen, "What happens is we post a video we've been recording for the past 3 minutes. The one showing you grabbing a waitress, ripping her apron off, verbally abusing her, and then threatening to destroy a small business because you got called out for assault. Preston's eyes fixed on the phone, and for the first time, fear flickered across his face. You're bluffing. You weren't recording. Actually, said Knox, holding up his phone. I was recording from a different angle. So was I, Sterling added. And me, from Zinc. Funny thing about biker clubs, Gunnar said, moving closer to Preston's table. We've learned over the years that when you look like we do, people assume you're the bad guys. So we document everything. Every interaction with the public, every confrontation, every moment that might end up in court. It saved us from dozens of false accusations. He held out his hand. So here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to stand up, you're going to look Jade in the eye, and you're going to apologize for assaulting her. Then you're going to pay your bill, including a 50% tip to compensate her for the trauma you caused and the apron you destroyed. Then you're going to walk out of here and never come back. If you do all that, we keep the video to ourselves. And if I don't, Preston's voice had lost its confidence, cracking slightly on the last word. Then we post it, Flint said simply, to every social media platform, to business news sites, to the tech blogs that love reporting on billionaire bad behavior, to the SEC investigators who are already looking into your dealings. And we make sure everyone knows that Preston Caldwell, the great tech innovator, likes to grab women and rip their clothes off when they don't bow and scrape fast enough. Preston looked at his colleagues for support, but they were studiously avoiding eye contact. He looked at the other diners, but they'd all pulled out their phones and were recording now too. The entire restaurant had become a jury, and they'd already reached their verdict. This is extortion, Preston said weakly. No. Jade spoke for the first time, her voice stronger than she felt. This is consequences. You grabbed me. You ripped my apron. You humiliated me in front of 50 people. All these men are doing is giving you a chance to make it right before it gets worse. Preston's hand tightened on his phone, knuckles going white. For a moment, he looked like he might double down, might call the police, and try to spin this as the bikers harassing him. But then Torch pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Just posted a preview to my Instagram. Caption says, Tech billionaire Preston Caldwell assaults waitress at the Copper Lodge in Reno. Full video coming soon unless he does the right thing. I've got 50,000 followers. Wonder how many of them are sharing it right now. Preston's phone immediately started buzzing. Text messages, notifications, alerts. His face went from pale to gray as he read them. His PR team, his lawyer, his business partners, all asking the same thing. What the hell was happening? Okay, he said finally, the word barely a whisper. Okay, I'll apologize. Louder, Gunnar commanded. And stand up. Look her in the eye. Preston stood on shaking legs and turned to face Jade. I'm sorry for grabbing you and damaging your apron. It was inappropriate and wrong. And, Flint prompted. Preston's jaw worked. And I'll pay for the damage and tip appropriately. 50%, Axel reminded him. Plus you're buying dinner for every Iron Rider in that back room. That's 12 meals at $30 each. Add it to your bill. Preston pulled out his wallet with trembling hands and counted out bills. The dinner bill was $847. 50% tip on that was $423.50. 12 additional meals added another $360. He put $1,400 bills on the table, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. The apron, Jade said quietly. It was custom-made. Cost me $100. Preston added another 100 to the pile without a word. Now leave, Gunnar said. And if we ever hear about you treating service workers like this again, if we hear about you putting your hands on anyone without permission, that video goes public. We'll be watching, Mr. Caldwell. Count on it. Preston and his colleagues fled, leaving behind half-eaten meals and the wreckage of his reputation. The moment the door closed behind them, the restaurant erupted in applause. Diners stood up, cheering for Jade and the Iron Riders. The manager finally emerged from the kitchen, took one look at the scene, and immediately understood what had happened. Jade, are you okay? He asked, genuine concern on his face. I am now, she said, looking at the pile of money on the table. $1,400, more than she usually made in a week. Gunnar handed her the cash. This is yours, every penny. And if that apron can't be fixed, You let me know. My old lady's a seamstress. She'll make you a new one. No charge. Jade counted out $300 and tried to hand it to Gunnar. For the meals. For helping me. You push her hand back, gently. We didn't help you for money, darling. We helped because it was the right thing to do. You keep every cent of that. Consider it payment for having to deal with men like him. Over the next hour, the video that Torch had posted spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, it had 100,000 views. Within an hour, 500,000. Tech blogs picked it up. Business news sites ran with. By midnight, Preston Caldwell was trending on Twitter, and not in a good way. His company's PR team issued a statement claiming he'd been under stress and was seeking counseling. His business partners issued their own statement distancing themselves from his behavior. 3 companies announced they were severing ties with his venture capital firm. The SEC investigation that had been moving slowly suddenly accelerated. But the most satisfying response came from Preston's ex-wives, all 3 of whom went public with their own stories of his behavior. Grabbing, pushing, verbal abuse behind closed doors. Suddenly, Jade's story wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. 2 weeks later, Preston Caldwell resigned from his company's board. His net worth had dropped by an estimated $1 billion as investors fled and business deals collapsed. He announced he was taking a sabbatical to focus on personal growth. The Copper Lodge, meanwhile, saw business triple. People came from all over Nevada just to eat at the place where the bikers stood up for the Waitress. The manager gave Jade a raise and promoted her to head server. The owner commissioned a mural for the back room showing 12 bikers standing behind a Waitress with a caption, "We protect our own." Jade used her newfound fame and the money she'd saved to finally make the jump to full-time nursing. She got a position at Reno General Hospital working in the ER, where she discovered that dealing with difficult patients was a lot easier after you'd face down a billionaire with 12 bikers at your back. The Iron Riders continued their Friday night meetings at the Copper Lodge, and Jade always stopped by to say hello when she had a night off. They become family in that strange way that sometimes happens when strangers show up at exactly the right moment and refuse to look away. 6 months after the incident, Preston Caldwell's lawyer reached out to Jade with a settlement offer. $500,000 in exchange for signing an NDA and agreeing not to discuss the incident publicly anymore. Jade called Gunnar for advice. They met at a coffee shop, and she showed him the offer. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Gunnar stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Depends. Do you need the money? I could use it. Student loans are killing me. But I don't know if I want to let him buy my silence." "Then don't," Gunnar said simply. "Your story helped other women come forward with theirs. It exposed a pattern of abuse that needed exposing. That's worth more than money." Jade thought about it for a long moment, then texted her lawyer, "No deal. My story's not for sale." Preston's lawyer called back within an hour, raising the offer to $1 million. Jade's response was the same, "Not interested." The offer stopped after that, and Jade went on with her life. She worked her shifts at the hospital, paid down her loans slowly but steadily, and occasionally stopped by the Copper Lodge to share a beer with the bikers who'd changed her life. 3 years later, Preston Caldwell was arrested for securities fraud. The SEC investigation had uncovered years of illegal trading, and he was looking at 20 years in federal prison. His empire had crumbled completely, his fortunes seized by the government, his reputation destroyed beyond repair. The news broke on a Friday night. Jade was at the Copper Lodge, having dinner with the Iron Riders in the back room like she did most Fridays now. Someone showed her the headline on their phone, and she read it without expression. "How do you feel?" Gunnar asked quietly. Jade thought about it, really thought about it. "I feel like justice is slow, but it gets there eventually. And I feel grateful that I had 12 guardian angels show up when I needed them most." She raised her beer glass. "To the Iron Riders, for teaching me that standing up to bullies doesn't require money or power, just courage and people willing to have your back." 12 glasses raised in response, and the back room of the Copper Lodge filled with the sound of family, the kind you choose, celebrating the kind of victory that matters most, refusing to let cruelty win. If this story moved, share it with someone who needs to remember that assault is assault regardless of who commits it, and that sometimes justice comes wearing leather and riding Harleys. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that real power comes from protecting others, not dominating them. Drop a comment about a time someone stood up for you when you needed it most, because stories like Jade's remind us that we're never alone as long as people are willing to do the right thing.